The good member from the 14th to move adoption of the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I move Amendment 1336.
It's moved and seconded we adopt Amendment 1336. Remarks. The good member from the 14th, Representative Corey.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. Urging the body's adoption of this amendment this evening, what it would do would be strengthen the underlying bill and provide what I believe are meaningful changes and updates to the bill, and provide some additional balance to the constitutional powers surrounding emergency powers. First, it would limit an emergency order to 60 days. And at that point, the legislature or the leadership would have to act to either extend that, modify it, or end that. I believe that 2 months is plenty of time for an underlying emergency. It gives the governor broad authority over those 2 months without having to immediately report back to the legislature. But what it does do at a 60-day mark would say, we as the legislative body, the voice of the people, would have to come together to decide how we want to respond to the ongoing emergency. Hopefully no emergency lasts that long, but in the case that one does, it would give us our voice and our say. I think that's important for powers. Secondly, it would add prohibition of activities. Currently, under state law, we as the legislative body really only have a say over suspension of statutes. And we think that that's not really far enough. We should have a say in whether or not we're prohibiting activities going forward. We think that that's fair. And again, it allows for the people who are being, I guess, governed under this emergency order to have their say in how they want to be part of that going forward. Lastly, it does create a new joint legislative oversight committee that would allow for more interaction between the executive branch and the legislative branch. That's also important because we need to have clear understanding of what is going on in an ongoing emergency, and we need to be able to give our input and our advice on financial matters, bills, and other things like that, and we think it's an appropriate measure to move forward, so I would urge the body's adoption. Thank you.
The good gentleman from the 15th, Representative Defoe. Good member from the 15th, the good gentleman, Representative Defoe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm urging a yes vote on this amendment. The people of Washington State, Madam Speaker, I've heard from folks all around it, and I've heard especially from folks in my district in Central Washington. They're really tired of this state of emergency. This amendment here makes an important change to the underlying bill. And that change, Madam Speaker, is to limit the state of emergency to an actual time of emergency. Madam Speaker, emergencies are by definition circumstances when things are emergent and unstable. We've been in a crisis for some time now, but we have not been in an emergency. Madam Speaker, the emergency powers as they exist in Washington State are the most far-reaching, overreaching in the entire United States of America. This amendment brings them back in line with what most other states already exercise. And the reason why most other states put a limit of, as this amendment does, 60 days on a state of emergency is because we here in America believe in separation of powers. We believe in the legislative prerogative to write laws and to determine budgets. The way that the state of emergency has existed for the last 2 years is outrageous, it's unacceptable, and it tests the boundaries and the intention of our very Constitution. Madam Speaker, if we don't accept this amendment and we accept the watered-down underlying bill that really does nothing to change the emergency powers that exist in Washington State, we will be doing a disservice to the millions of people in Washington State who have had to endure the last 2 years without the ability to petition their elected officials and receive any sort of resolution to the issues and the concerns that they've raised. Madam Speaker, there's a reason why there's 147.
The good member, you have 20 seconds if you can conclude.
Why there's 147 legislators and one governor. And that is because our founders intended that we, the legislators, would be closest to the people. This amendment restores proper limits, proper boundaries on a state of emergency, and I ask you to support it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 14th, Representative Corey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to rise to respectfully disagree with the good gentleman from the 46th. The amendment that I'm offering does not in any way weaken our state's ability to respond. As a matter of fact, it allows for a broad coalition to continue to respond so that the people have a say in how they're governed. It doesn't impede in the military department. It does nothing of the sort. It allows us to become part of the solution for getting out of an emergency or in an ongoing crisis, be part of how we want to govern ourselves. Again, this is good policy, it's good governance, and it allows the people a say in how they're governed. Please vote yes.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 35th, Representative MACEWEN.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment's important. It's not arbitrarily drawn up. It wasn't done without any thought put into it. That's not the case at all. It's well thought out, and it's purposeful. Our founding fathers, both the state level and international level, wanted a government that had equal branches of governing. And that's what this is really about. No one for a moment in here disputes the fact that the governor should be able to call a state of emergency and be able to have extraordinary powers when those times arise. The point of being able to do that is to be able to react quickly, and oftentimes when communications are in peril or other situations that require extraordinary measures to stabilize the situation. It's important that this body and our colleagues across the rotunda be able to have an equal voice after things have stabilized. It doesn't mean that the situation's fully resolved. That's not what this amendment says. This amendment says we have a voice. Yeah, stabilize the situation. If it's not stable enough, we're going to concur and keep that state of emergency going. That's all this does. It was alluded to earlier, one executive and 147 legislators. Just by very definition, we're closest to the people. And the people deserve to have a voice. And through us, they have that voice. It's just not practical to have that voice through an executive branch. That's not how our system works. And so through us, the voice of the people of this state can be heard. And we are an equal branch of government. And if the conditions warrant, we will certainly continue that state of emergency. This does not usurp any other power. It just gives a voice to the people through this body and through the other side of the rotunda. And it's critical to maintain that balance of power in this state. I urge this body's adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 6th District, Representative Graham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm rising in support of this amendment on behalf of the constituents in my district, both Republican and Democrat and Independent, that have been reaching out to me through emails, phone calls, meetings. Madam Speaker, this is an important amendment to restore balance to the branches of our government, to restore faith in the people that we represent, that they know that when we have these emergencies that happen, that they are really emergencies and not a situation that is ongoing in which the people that we represent don't seem to have a say. We are their representatives, and when we are not at the table, the people that we represent, they're not at the table either, Madam Speaker. This is important, and I am urging a yes on this for the people that we represent so their voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 31st, Representative Stokesbury.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also rising in favor of this amendment. As you've heard mentioned, Madam Speaker, I think this amendment does two main things. First, it requires the legislature to come together to renew emergency proclamations after 60 days. And contrary to what you may have heard, Madam Speaker, that's not an arbitrary date. That was chosen after looking at what other states like New York, Illinois, California do. Madam Speaker, it's also important to note that we're talking about the continuation of emergency orders, not about the continuity of government. Questions of the continuity of government are handled by a different section of the Constitution and statute entirely. This is about long-lasting emergencies. If we've had 60 days to sort it out, then this chamber, the People's House, and that other chamber across the rotunda, deserve to have a voice. This isn't about the current emergency or the current governor. This is about the next one. This is about making sure that the people continue to have trust in the government that supposedly represents them, to make sure they feel like they have a voice. Part of the reason why we're a democracy and not a monarchy, it's not because kings can't have a good heart or good intentions or good ideas, but it's because that's too much power to vest in the hands of one person. Yet Washington is one of a tiny handful of states that says the governor alone can declare not only when an emergency begins, but when it will end. And that's too much power to have in the hands of just one person, and I think antithetical to our democratic norms. Also, Madam Speaker, this amendment would say that the law regarding prohibiting activity is to be treated the same way as the current law treats statutory suspensions. Madam Speaker, it's quite cliched, but I think it's true. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And going on now the third year of this, I have yet to see a single convincing argument as to why the legislature should be allowed to say, to have a role in continuing to extend statutory suspensions, but should not have a role in continuing orders suspending, prohibiting activity. Madam Speaker, we have a pretty good law when it comes to suspending statute. All this amendment would do, in addition to the topic I mentioned earlier, would extend that same framework to prohibiting activity. I urge a yes vote, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 6th District, Representative Volz.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I too am urging excuse me, a yes vote on this amendment. This amendment really does strengthen the underlying bill tremendously, and it was really thoughtful. I had my own amendment that I was going to run tonight, a striker. I ran the same striker in committee. I was going to run it again tonight. But when I was looking at the two side by side, this really tempered a bit what I was going to do in my striker. So I think it's a very reasonable approach to this. And not to rehash too much what was said earlier, but I would put our collective wisdom of the 98 of us up against any single person in this policy arena, period. Bar none. It's just a fact of reality that these group decisions are generally better than the decisions of an individual. And one of the biggest advantages, we're out in our communities, whether it's Seattle, whether it's out in the peninsula, whether it's in Spokane, whether it's in Spokane Valley, Okanagan, Wenatchee, wherever we're from, we're hearing and seeing different things. And we come to Olympia to amplify the voice of our people so they are heard, the citizens of our district and our state and our communities. And that's what's being lost in this. And I will tell you, it's been quite surreal. And I've heard from my friends along the Oregon border that suddenly I drive 40 miles from my house and there is no emergency. There's life as normal. It was a very bizarre experience. And I know plenty of people in Spokane that early on were going to Idaho to get haircuts and go out to dinner. And there was no major, massive health risk or environment. And so it's been this kind of bizarre, surreal experience living in an emergency when just a stone's throw away, it ends. And so I urge adoption of this amendment to give us a voice in the process and give a voice to our citizens from the diverse communities and the diverse thoughts and ideas, and that we can all come together and share and express our opinion. The other piece is we need to be on the record. We should not be hiding behind the governor's edicts. We as elected officials have a duty to our constituents to be on the record on some of this stuff. So I urge the adoption of this well thought out, well-crafted amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 13th, Representative Dent.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the state of Washington, we're named after our first president. And he was a very intelligent, interesting, forward-thinking individual. And if you read some of his writings, every time I do, I'm always impressed with how deep he could think. But after the Revolutionary War and they elected him to be president of the United States, the one thing he was really concerned about was the president didn't become a king. And he worked really hard to make sure that that didn't happen. And that's one of the reasons he established the role as the president to what we know it as today. But that was one of the reasons he stepped down after 2 terms, because he didn't want to be a king, and he didn't want the United States of America to have a king. He wanted him to have a president, because he understood the president should only have so much power. So the number one issue that I hear from my constituents: when are we going to fix the emergency powers? What's going on with emergency powers? I can't go to the coffee shop. I can't go out to dinner. I can't go anywhere without somebody asking me that question. And I think that we as a legislative body, and I heard it from someone here a few minutes ago, that it doesn't matter. It's not about politics. It's about the power of the legislature. And we should have some power here too. And we should be able to bring our folks and their concerns and what's going on in our world here and work on this. Because what happens in the 13th district probably isn't the same thing that happens in many of the districts on this side of the mountain, because we are different. But we should share in those decision making. And that's what my constituents are just asking to do. They want to share in what is going on. They want to have a voice, and right now they don't have it. And my emails are still lit up with, what are you going to do? And the last few days, it is really elevated, because they know we're almost out of session. And I think this is a reasonable amendment. I think it makes good sense to take it back and let our people know that we are the voice of the people and we care. Madam Speaker, I'm urging a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional remarks. The good member from the 17th, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am urging a yes vote on this amendment. Madam Speaker, we are set up and established the way that we are as a government, state government, in our state constitution. And it is very clear that there are 3 branches of government, very clear what our powers, our duties, our responsibilities are, and really where the boundaries are for each of the branches. And Madam Speaker, as you well know, we take an oath as elected officials serving in this body, and every elected official takes an oath to uphold the Constitution of Washington. And Madam Speaker, clearly over the last 2 years, we have seen quite an imbalance of power. That would be quite the understatement. And so it's time to put the proper balance back into our government. And it's time, Madam Speaker, that we all make sure that our state government is operating in accordance with the Constitution that we all took an oath to uphold. And so, Madam Speaker, this amendment helps ensure that we can do that and do it well. I urge your yes vote.
Thank you. The Speaker wants to let members know we're going to defer action on this bill, but it will retain its place on the second reading calendar.